I now feel 10 pounds lighter than I did yesterday. I'd say more than that, but I'm afraid that's all I can recall regarding the passage of days, of which I have spent a countless number entombed in this porcelain prison cell. At times I hear trepid footsteps on the other side, or distant, disgusted voices crying out my name. Of course, this stopped long ago, so it is difficult to discern the time from here. I fear that there may be no way to stop this. Not known to me, anyway. All I can do now is report my findings with their appropriate context. Whoever you are, let the following serve as a warning against brown-nosing the boundaries of our existence. They are there for a reason. To those of you who might have a prior understanding of the phenomena to be explained, let the following serve as my dying request. He must be stopped, for I fear he may wreak havoc from beyond upon our world. My journey ends here, in this truck stop bathroom stall, scrawling this message on its walls with the means availed to me. It all began at Amazing Emilio's, a hole-in-the-wall antique shop wedged within a maze of independently owned, though nonetheless highly exclusive and high-end eateries, featuring the manifold cuisines of various cultures the world over, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. As an aspiring playwright, I've always been one to seek out a sort of authenticity that extends beyond the mere novelty that tends to envelop it in much of 21st century New England suburbia. To search for that at a gluten-free Thai Tex-Mex fusion restaurant founded and operated by some hipster upstart and his daddy's tech firm money is a fool's errand. But it can be found in a number of places, such as the aforementioned antique shop, by anyone with more discerning eyes. Emilio was an ancient dwarf of a man, wise and stubborn in a way that is unique to the people of Sicily, the land of his birth. This, of course, was tempered and ironed out in a way that is usually customary for those, like him, who immigrate here as children. In his own day, there were, of course, accusations from others that he was involved with organized crime, but over time, that just became an inference he would make to amuse the neighborhood kids. The truth of his character could reasonably glean from his military record, having served as a sergeant, and having fought in Anzio during the Second World War. For his trouble, he of course received the benefits awarded in the GI Bill, in addition to a silver star and a Purple Heart, which he was known to display proudly on the wall behind his desk. He never spoke on his military service, so I know him mostly as a kind, if a bit offbeat, old man who cared deeply about those around him. The day I entered his shop for the last time was foggy and overcast, a gloomy portent to which I paid no heed. "Marcus Quimberton," he said upon my arrival, without leaving the reclining chair that constituted his home away from home in these his twilight years. "How many years has it been now?" 2 months, Emilio, I corrected him in good spirit. "Didn't I tell you you'd be the first to know when I came back from my writer's retreat?" His immediate response was a casual wave of the hand. "I'm just glad I didn't have to send any of my boys to hold you to that." He began with a smile that possessed the coy sort of warmth of an old man's joviality. "How did New York treat you? Make it out on Broadway yet?" "It was just a workshop, sir," I replied. "But one of the bigwig directors told me that he'd have a personal look at whatever I sent him next, so here's hoping." In truth, I figured that's likely what they told everyone, but I wanted to present good news that he would grasp more easily. "Va bene, Marcus, va bene," he said while rising from his chair. Don't let those figlio de putane knock you around like that joker from the rep you're always telling me about. He continued as he locked me in his embrace. Oh, I'll give him hell, you know that. Again, I went through these motions more out of joy for seeing an old friend after a dormitory stay elsewhere. It was good to be back. So, to what do I owe the pleasure of a visit from the next great American playwright? I figured I'd just stop in and see if anything caught my interest. Well, if your interest is in colonial period cookware or Civil War memorabilia, you've come to the right place, he began while releasing me from his vice-like embrace. That's the bulk of what I had coming in over the last few weeks. What about that thing? I asked, gesturing to a small, painted wooden idol resting on a table amongst a series of similarly sized knickknacks and old action figures. I don't think I ever saw it here before I left. At its mention, Emilio grew distant and pensive. I don't know, Marcus, he began. I know you're usually more interested in all that occult witch's brew shit, but I didn't really get a good feeling from the guy who sold it to me. Big fella. You know, like you, kinda, but a lot more blunt. Rude is a better word looking back. Kinda talked like he was in a Shakespeare show, but with a loud, flat monotone. Which is unusual since he refused to talk about anything other than the little carving and all the business around it. Not to mention the smell. I mean, really. The guy reeked like shit. I think he might have been one of those autistics or something like that. A good story is a crucial component in any decent sales pitch. I recall hearing that somewhere, I said. Getting smart with me today, huh? He retorted. Thing is, that's not the weirdest part. No. It's the fact that he practically gave it away for free. Seemed like he just wanted to be rid of it. Prompted by Emilio's words, I studied the idol again. It was a rather intricate carving of a wizard, pointy hat, robes and all, that would fit in the palm of the average person's hand. The wood itself was of a pale, fleshy color, but the robe and hat were of a more purplish maroon hue, both dotted head to toe with thick brown blotches. How much for it? I asked Emilio, who by then appeared a bit befuddled. Before, I had a more passive curiosity regarding this odd little knick-knack sticking out among the crowd, but something about it drew out a more active interest. Consider it a homecoming gift, Marcus, Emilio said after a few moments of considerate thought. Oh, I couldn't. Nonsense, Emilio cut me off. You'd be doing me a favor. The thing kinda gives me the creeps if I'm being honest. I get a bit of an upset stomach when I look at it for too long. Are you sure that's not just because of your ongoing refusal to listen to your doctor when he tells you to take your stomach pills? I offered. This was met, as it often is, with a dismissive wave of Emilio's hand. Bah, he said. If those pricks want to push that poison on me, they'll have to pump it into my corpse. But really, go ahead. I've always been able to offload all that satanic crap people come in here with onto you. What's stopping you now? That was a question I had no answer for, so I took the idol and thanked Emilio before returning home. When I got back, I placed the idol on my bookshelf along with the other wood carvings I had collected over the years, and returned to my desk to work on that play I've been putting off writing lately. Who knows, so I thought. Maybe Emilio was right. Maybe this would be the one I finally sent out to a stage manager of some sort. The day passed on as normal, but I began feeling rather nauseous after a couple of hours. This, however, wasn't too far out of the ordinary given how mild it was. What was odd, however, was the massive dump that succeeded it. Looking back, my imagination still strains to discern how I could possibly have expelled such a pointy, prodigious log. I mean, seriously, that shit felt like a demonic perversion of the act of childbirth. While glad to have passed it, I took no pleasure in breaking it up with a plunger to finally force it down the flange. After 6 hours of travel and the walk to Emilio's followed by my walk home, followed by all of this, I thought an early rest on my part was well earned. Slumber came over me with a fast, burdensome embrace. What followed was a rather deeply vivid dream, which I will transcribe with the best of my effort. The first thing I remember feeling was the coldness of the snow-covered ground beneath my feet. Looking out at my new surroundings, I saw similarly snow-capped buildings of unusual design. Some were round and domed, others were more like large pyramids and ziggurats, but the larger among them appeared to be layered, heavily fortified castles. In addition, there appeared to be a rather long procession of people walking towards something that was too bright for my vision to initially betray. To start, everyone appeared to be at least a head taller than anyone I've ever seen, probably about 8 feet on average were I to hazard a guess. They carried with them carts and cattle, and wore a variety of ornate garments, with their own varieties of patterns and color beyond measure. The strangest thing to report about their beasts of burden was that the only sort among them that I recognized with any passing familiarity was the woolly mammoth. It took a few moments for my vision to acclimate to their gathering spot, but once I did, I saw what looked like a bearded giant, armed with a proportioned axe, donned in glowing armor and finery, with a winged crown atop his head. Upon getting closer to this being myself, I saw that he was surrounded by a handful of old men wearing robes and matching pointed hats. One among them bore a stark physical resemblance to the idol I had taken home earlier that day. "Where am I?" I asked one of the men beside me. My query was met with no response, as the man continued to guide his mammoth through the cobblestone street by the reins. I was similarly ignored by everyone and everything else, as if I were a specter in this place. Soon after, I decided that the best course of action would be to follow them. The walk was fairly short, and we were soon greeted by the host of old men surrounding the giant. "Your presence disturbs the balance of this mystical rite, Master Quimberton." Only when looking to my left did I find the source. It was the old man, donned in the maroon-brown blotted robes. Up close he was deeply haggard and disheveled, and smelled like hangover diarrhea. "You should not be in this place," he said with an embittered, wolfish grin. Before I could respond, I felt a chill overtake my skin, while a warmth began to simmer in my gut. At that moment I awoke, finding myself smeared in that now all too familiar substance. In essence, I shat the bed. The weeks that followed were a trial in and of themselves, in that I would be accosted by an overpowering nausea and consequent incontinence any time I would leave my apartment. Strangely, it would always dissipate upon my return home. At first, I believed it to be stress relating to my job, but it would come about even if I left to run errands, only to abate again the instant I walked through my apartment door. As embarrassing as it might sound, I powered through this ordeal with the regular use of Tums and diapers, until I was prompted by my boss, along with a chorus consisting of those at the office and neighboring cubicles, to take some time off work until my condition improved. When I got back home that day, I glanced at the collection of figures of various kinds perched on my bookshelf. and recalled that all of this started when I brought that strange idol home from Amazing Emilio's. Was it possible that this thing was the culprit? Had I fallen prey to an actual curse? Under normal circumstances, I tend to disregard superstition, but at that point I was willing to try anything. With little hesitancy, I tossed the idol out the window, figuring this might be an amusing story to tell Emilio at my next visit to the shop. Just as I began to picture his impending self-satisfaction, with my confirmation of his initial suspicion, I felt a sharp pain in my stomach, and began to spew a molten monsoon of diarrhea on the spot. Barely able to amass the strength to clean myself up, I staggered down the stairs and then outside, finally taming my bowels upon my retrieval of the idol from the ground below. It was then, while laying on the ground covered in the remnants of my own making, that I discovered something. The closer the idol was to my person, the less intense the sickness was. It was a fairly easy fix, so I thought. With this new knowledge, I was able to return to my normal life, and in fact possessed a new sort of vigor that I had apparently lacked prior. I was, overall, a lot happier, and had a lot more energy to get into a stricter workout plan. I was more productive at work, which I was grateful for my boss to take notice of. My creative pursuits flourished as well, and I managed to bang out an excellent script, which I then sent to theater companies all over the country. All I had to do was ensure that the idol was on my person whenever possible. At a certain point, it became second nature, with the idol's presence in my pockets growing to be as ubiquitous as that of my wallet, cell phone, and car keys. It worked swimmingly, for a time. The nausea returned gradually, like a wave, and its accompanying incontinence followed shortly after. The solution only became clear to me while I was at work one day, when I gripped the idol in my pocket in the midst of my mind's battle for dominance over my bowels. The incoming fecal wave had been halted by my physical contact with the idol. Upon realizing this, I went to the supply closet and fastened the idol to my chest with some duct tape, and returned to work. While this was starkly daunting in its implications, it was hardly the most disturbing of the new developments. That title belongs to what followed a rash of brutal coughing fits that began in the days to follow. At first, it began as a sort of unproductive cough that's usually the result of a scratchy throat, but the bile soon began to reveal its nature. I had a paper towel handy on the occasion, but where mucus typically makes its home upon its eventual expulsion, there was none. In its place was something rather unexpected. Brown in hue, squishy in sensation, and violently offensive to even the most undiscerning of noses. Yes, I had coughed up shit. Doubtless, this is the point at which one might wonder why I didn't consult a doctor at any time. The reasoning is twofold. On one hand, I'm American, and I don't have the extra limbs needed to cover any sort of medical cost. On the other, I was certain by this time that I had been cursed. If one happens to find any sort of doctor in all of deep Yankeedom that helps treat curses for a reasonable fee, I hereby grant said enterprising researcher every right to his hind-sighted nitpicking. Regardless, good news did manage to find its way to my door through all of this, in the form of a letter from the Keene Company, stating that they were highly impressed with the work I had submitted several weeks back, and that they wanted to iron out a production contract at their headquarters in New York City. With arrogant, assumptive haste, I began the drive down to answer the summons. believing that the actual nature of this curse had been revealed to me. At the time, it seemed reasonable to suspect that the imposition of the uncontrollable incontinence that followed my abandonment of the idol was a mere cost of the rewards that came with holding it. How had I not seen it before? While that particular condition was worsening, my luck was improving. I drove with a heretofore unrealized vitality, presuming that my knowledge of this aspect would allow me to weaponize it in the future. As I felt the wind at my back and a majestic vision of things to come within my grasp, on the scenic drive through western Massachusetts, I was hit with a sudden familiar pang of what some might call the revenge of King Moctezuma II. How was this possible? I thought to myself as I fought the impending destruction of my only clean suit. The idol was fixed on my person as always. I was doing everything right. What gave? Even worse, I began to choke and cough out fully formed turds. With the new impending luck, did it demand more? There was only one way to find out, I thought. Well, two ways, I suppose, but the result would likely be the same regardless of the path, so I opted for the far easier and more comfortable of the two. I took the idol from its position on my chest and put it in my mouth. On the stretch of the trip that followed, I held the idol tightly in my cheek, wondering to myself how I would be able to conduct myself at the upcoming meeting. Surely I would need to remove the idol from my mouth to speak, but what then? I may have alluded to another way that might have offered a bit more social leeway, even if it might have made me walk a bit funny. However, I didn't really have the time to mentally ready myself for that suppository eventuality, because the nauseous incontinence made its terrible, inconvenient return. Perhaps this was a sign of some sort, the idol's way of revealing its full intent. Perhaps, so I thought, it wanted us to become one. It would make sense, would it not? My approximation to the idol had thus far stayed the adverse effects of the curse. Was it entirely unreasonable to assume that uniting it with my very waist might break me free of all of this? As I thought to concentrate on the road in the midst of this intestinal chaos, I swallowed the idol with the last vestiges of my now bygone constitution. To my discomfort and annoyance, nothing really changed at first. Then I began to hear deep, resonant laughter. I didn't even bother looking to one side or the other, because it wasn't coming from any particular direction. To make matters worse, I began leaking. Yes, leaking. At first, just from my then barely elastic anus, but then from my mouth. I tried to scream, but only a torrent of yet more pungent diarrhea poured forth from my throat. My resistance was vigorous, but ultimately inefficacious. Soon after, my nose began to run with constant fecal drippings, as did my ears. I saw a sign up ahead that the next exit led to a rest stop, and this became my next obvious destination. Perhaps if I could remove the idol, I could at least get myself back to some semblance of normalcy, I thought, as I began to cry tears of shit. "I need to use your restroom, please," I gurgled out at the attendant inside through gouts of fecal vomit. "Ugh, what the fuck?" he replied in futility as I disregarded his concern in my lavatory pursuit. My attempt to open the bathroom door was in vain, as I looked down through my shit-coated eyes to discover the red "Occupied" label affixed to the handle. Upon pounding more furiously on the door, I saw that my hands were leaving large brown marks. Shit had begun to seep through the very pores of my skin. "Can't you see it's occupied, shit for brains?" I heard on the other end. I could only laugh at the irony of this unfortunate soul's choice of insult as I continued my insistent assault on the bathroom door. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally swung open. "What's the big idea?" "Holy mother of fuck!" the former occupant said before I reflexively vomited diarrhea onto his face. I had slammed and locked the door behind me well before any reporting could be done on his reaction. Newly confined in a safe private place, I took greater stock of my condition. A cursory look at my hands betrayed that my fingernails must have fallen off during my attempt to enter, and a look in the mirror revealed that my hair had all but fallen out. The vestige staring back at me from the mirror was not my own. In its usual place was a hulking fecal homunculus. That is when I began to write this account on the walls, with the last of my earthly strength, with the only writing utensil availed to me. I no longer feel as if I am in my own body. That had been dissolved long ago. The only vestige of my former self that remains is my mind, rendering me into a sentient blob of mobile shit, though I feel it encroaches now even upon that. Soon, I will be utterly consumed. Will I still be conscious after that? Will I simply be a dead lump of shit? I know so little, I've come to discover. The only remaining constant is the howling laughter, which I'm fairly certain belongs to that wizard from my dream. I call now upon anyone who possesses even a passive understanding of sorcery. Please, avenge me.